Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so this is another video on the recently released jail calls involving Charlie Adelson and his mother Donna. Okay, and in this video, I kind of like to focus on Charlie's reaction, his own reaction to his own conviction, and how he feels about his case. Okay, and I do work in criminal defense, and I can't even remember all the criminal cases I've worked on, and I have to say, I haven't personally run into a defendant who was actually innocent. Okay. And I've been working at this for more than 10 years. And I still have yet to have a case where you just have a completely innocent person who is just mistaken identity. Actually, you know what? I think I had one case, maybe one case where it was a mistaken identity. Other than that, every case I worked on, so I really don't have a lot of experience with really innocent people. But I do have to say that in these recent jail calls, Charlie seems to be really shocked. He seems to be really, really shocked that he was actually convicted in this case. Okay. So that's interesting. That's interesting. But I have to say that, as a person who's been around a lot of criminal cases and a lot of criminal defendants, I see Charlie really invested in his technical innocence. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see any investment in his actual innocence. Like, there's nothing in anything he says where he's like really like lamenting and just crying over his actual innocence. He seems to be really invested in his technical innocence. I think that's actually kind of interesting, actually. And I've worked around a lot of defendants, and they're always invested in their technical innocence. I mean, that's kind of par for the course. But he seems to really just be just fanatically invested in his technical innocence. Okay, so I think it's interesting that you never do you hear him saying, "Oh my God, how did I end up in jail? I didn't have anything to do with this." I'm just like, he doesn't really act like that. He just seems to be just really obsessed with how he needs to have the venue changed to another. His case needs to be changed to another venue because in Tallahassee he's not going to get a fair jury, and just all this obsession with the technical aspects of the defense. And of course, if you put up a defense, you have to be obsessed with the technical aspects. That's true. But never once does he say, "My God, how did I end up here? Here I was dating this crazy girl, and she's involved with gang members, and what a stupid idiot I was getting involved with her, and now here I am for the rest of my life." Not even an ounce of that. I think that's really interesting. So let's listen to a couple of clips from these recently released jailhouse calls, okay, just to kind of get a flavor of sort of exactly what went wrong according to Charlie. Why he's so shocked? Why is he so shocked that he was actually convicted? Because he really thought he was going home. So let's have a listen.
The way everything was like spun at the closing, I was like, this isn't reality. These people are watching this. This is not reality, but they had this 2 hour production.
Okay, so here what Charlie's doing is he's kind of complaining about something that I see a lot in criminal cases. Okay, in criminal trials, this is something that defendants have trouble understanding. Okay, really, law enforcement can do a fantastic job investigating a case, right? But law enforcement investigators will never discover exactly what happened, right? They'll get the basic sketch of what happened. But what prosecutors bring to a case is really just a theory. Okay, so prosecutors, district attorneys, they prosecute a theory. They don't prosecute a photograph of exactly what happened. All they can do is present a theory. Okay, so defendants are always really frustrated how the closing statements don't match exactly the reality, and it's like, they're letting them just hey, this prosecuting attorney is just making stuff up, making stuff up. What they don't understand is that prosecutors can only prosecute a theory of the case. Okay, and so if you actually live through it yourself, you'll notice the theory of the case doesn't match exactly reality, and so defendants will be just flabbergasted and they'll just be indignant that the prosecutor is not exactly matching reality, and they'll be like, hey, she's just making stuff up, she's exaggerating. Well, of course, because all the state attorney has is a theory of the case. Okay, nobody has a video of everything that happened. Okay, and so all the state attorney can prosecute is a theory of the case. Okay, so unfortunately that's the case in any criminal trial. I felt the same way with the Lori Vallow case up in Idaho, because the theory of the state was, hey, this is all about money and sex. This is all about money and sex. And okay, I'll admit there was a little bit of sex, and obviously, Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, they were really in love, and they were having like this major love affair. So there was sex involved. And there was some money involved, that's true. But I think they really missed the point that in the truth of what was going on, these people were religious maniacs. They were like religious fanatics, you know? And so I think that the state's theory of the case wasn't exactly in reality. They were kind of like stretching and exaggerating and also omitting some aspects of reality, right? So the same thing is true here. All that Georgia Kappelman can do is she can put together what she thinks is the most realistic theory according to the way she looks at the evidence, but no theory will actually match the actual facts. And so defendants, they just can't accept that the only thing that a prosecutor can do is bring a theory of the case, and then the defendant just gets all freaked out because it doesn't match exactly what they experienced. So this complaint that Charlie has that Georgia Kappelman in the closing statement was just like not telling things the way they really happened and sort of stretching and exaggerating and sort of making things up and spinning her story. From my experience working with a lot of criminal defendants and working in actual trials and actual criminal defense, right? I know not to take that as him claiming that he's actually innocent. Okay, I think that's something I see with almost all defendants. They can't stand it when a prosecutor sort of interprets the evidence and sort of advances a theory. Defendants don't like that. So when I hear Charlie complaining about people spinning and sort of exaggerating and closing arguments and all that to me is not a sign that he's actually feels like he's actually innocent. Okay, and then as you see in these next clips, you'll see that Charlie basically he actually admits that he really wasn't really himself sure that he would have a fair trial, right? Or that he would even realistically be able to win a criminal trial, right? But that he was convinced by his counsel that he might have a fair trial or at least a shot at winning this. So it's kind of interesting that even he really didn't think he on his own without the help of his attorney, he really didn't by himself think that he really had that good of a chance of winning. So this is very interesting. Let's listen to this.
I feel like a fool for even thinking or letting people convince me that I was gonna have a shot. I thought I was gonna get a fair shake, and I never put it this way. I never thought I was gonna get a fair shake. I got led to believe that I was gonna get a fair shake. I just don't know how Dan was so optimistic. He was very optimistic, which I appreciate. But
because the case was good, and he was good, and you were good. It was the jury, honey.
Okay, so this is really unfortunate for Charlie because in these jailhouse calls, now it's being leaked to the world that he didn't really, he wasn't really in agreement with his lawyer, and now he feels like his lawyer kind of misled him, right? But we're also seeing how when Charlie says he thought he had a fair shot or that he was led to believe that he'd have a fair shot, what was maybe the question was whether he'd get a fair jury in Tallahassee.
number one, this case is that would have to get moved out of Tallahassee.
And then in another part of the same call, Charlie reveals that what he was really hoping for was not necessarily to get an acquittal, but he was actually hoping to just get a hung jury.
One of the guards was saying to me, the best you can do is hang. The best you can do is hang. If you hang, you do it. If you hang, you stay here. And stay until they retry it.
So that suggests to me that what Charlie is really hoping for at this point, and I think this is probably pretty realistic, I think he's expecting, or at least hoping, that he might win his appeal, not on the merits of the case so much, not so much on the actual strength of the evidence or whether he was wrongfully convicted, but he might actually win an appeal on the Tallahassee court's denial of his motion for a change in venue. Okay, you'll remember, I think it was around jury selection time, before trial, the defense had actually filed a motion for a change of venue just on grounds that they just had a lot of difficulty finding a fair jury out of the jury pool in Tallahassee.
We had 5 people on the jury with law enforcement in the family.
With law enforcement in the family.
Yeah. I had a guy that was a 20-year sergeant in the Army and then retired in the post office 20 years. Or working in the post office. 20-year sergeant in the Army. Like 20 years black sergeant for the United States Army. Like you're not looking like how is this 16-year-old retired sergeant from the Army look at me? Like an alien.
So I think Charlie's being pretty realistic here. Okay, not to say that he's like has a great chance of winning an appeal of the decision to deny his motion for change of venue, right? So I don't think that's like a huge chance of winning. I mean, he may win an appeal on that, but but I think he's being pretty realistic because I think he's not focusing so much on whether he's actually innocent and whether the verdict was wrong. I think he's really focusing more on the technicalities. So that's what I mean when I say he's really invested in his technical innocence. You know what I'm saying? And I think we can also see that I think what shocked Charlie about actually being found guilty. Okay. I think the reason why the verdict shocked him is not necessarily that he thought he would be acquitted. Okay. Maybe that's not quite. I don't know. He said he thought he was going home. So maybe he did think he'd be acquitted. But I think what he was really holding out for was the idea that maybe one juror would hang the jury, right? One juror would hang the jury. And maybe if that juror was stubborn enough, maybe the jurors would just say, okay, we can't convict him, kind of like the OJ thing. But I do think it's revealing in these jail calls, okay, in these clips, and I'm going to play another clip here. I think it is revealing how in these little honest moments, I think Charlie has these little moments of honesty. He kind of does admit his realism. Okay, he tries to be very optimistic, but you can see he does have a realism, and that he does sort of admit that he needs a miracle. Okay, and that's pretty important. So let's just listen to this. Okay, I think this is a very important clip.
Just hang in there, please, because things might change.
No, things can change and miracles can happen.
So I think, in all realism, I think Charlie is expecting to file an appeal, and I'm sure the appeal is going to be a broad appeal, just covering all kinds of arguments. But I think what he thinks is probably a very strong argument for his appeal, and I think he's investing some hope in it. Is this kind of technical argument? It's not legitimate innocence, but it's technical innocence. Okay, I think he's invested in this idea of technical innocence, that he probably could never have gotten a fair trial in Tallahassee, and that the court actually committed a reversible error by denying his motion for a change of venue. Okay, and I think it's very important that the change of venue motion was filed as his jury expert was trying to find a fair jury, and I think they were running into a lot of trouble finding a fair jury, right? So, just to be realistic, I'm not trying to say that I'm in favor of Charlie Adelson. I'm just saying, a good appellate attorney might be able to get an appellate court to reverse and find reversible error in this Tallahassee court denying their motion for a change of venue. So I think that's the miracle he's hoping for. But I do think that Charlie, in little ways, I think he reveals that he doesn't really feel that innocent. I think he's invested in his technical innocence. Okay, but I think in terms of actual innocence, I think this last clip, I think, I'm going to interpret. I mean, you guys can interpret differently. Maybe I'm wrong. But he talks about how nobody could get a fair trial in Tallahassee, and then he goes, not even, and then he stops himself. Okay. Because I think what he was going to say is not even an innocent person, right? And I think that's kind of funny because the way he says it, oh, nobody could get a fair trial in Tallahassee, not even an innocent person. He doesn't let himself say that, because if he said that, that would be in a recorded jail call. So he knows he can't go that far. But I think if you just kind of use your imagination and you listen to this last clip, you'll see that he's thinking, God, not even an innocent person could get a fair trial. So, geez, I'm screwed, basically. So, let's listen to this one last clip and then some final comments. So, this I think is pretty funny. Listen to this.
Nobody could have won the case up here. Let's put it that way. Not even.
That's hilarious. So when you really listen to Charlie, kind of read between the lines, kind of try to penetrate through his veneer of optimism, because I think he tries to maintain a ton of optimism. But when you just penetrate through that veneer, I think you can see he's pretty realistic, and I think B, I think he knows that he needs a miracle, and he's holding out for it, right? And I think that's pretty much, I think he feels like the strongest argument of all the arguments is not that he's actually innocent, not that anybody's going to believe his story that he was extorted. Okay, I don't think he's not really holding a lot of faith in that. I think he's really holding a lot of faith that an appellate court will think, well, maybe they should have given him a change of venue. Maybe he couldn't find a fair jury in Tallahassee. I think that's what he's holding on to. So that tells you a lot. And I think in the end, I think he sort of admitted, almost like a Freudian slip, that not even an innocent person could get a fair trial in Tallahassee, which is his way of saying, I'm screwed. You know what I'm saying? Like he doesn't really think he's actually innocent. I think he's just invested in his technical innocence, And so when I think about that, I go back to his trial testimony, and I think of just he didn't seem like he really even believed in his own theory, And now that I can see him in these jail calls, I can see that he really doesn't believe in his theory. I think when you saw him, talking about how he got along with Katie McBonowa, and how he got along with her so well while she was extorting him, and he tried to explain, well, I didn't think she was my extortionist when I was getting along with her, but later she became the extortionist. But he just can't generate that feeling of outrage, that somebody would extort him like that, and what it would mean to be extorted like that. If he really was extorted, I think he would have much more visceral outrage that somebody put him in jail for the rest of his life. That somebody would put him on the hook for a capital murder, a first-degree murder conviction. So when I look at Charlie's actual testimony, when he actually talks about Katie McBonowa, I'm listening for his tone, because in his tone, you can feel his deep attitude, okay? His deep attitude. And what would his attitude be if he was really just an oblivious victim, totally innocent, okay? Had nothing to do with ever suggesting anything happening to Dan Markel, never suggesting that anybody ever harmed Dan Markel. And then out of the blue, this crazy lady with connections to, Miami street gangs, suddenly they just go behind his back and they just end up killing his brother-in-law in the middle of his sister's divorce, which is going to make his sister look terrible, right? And if he was really so innocent, it just came out of the blue. I think his attitude towards Katie would be totally bitter. I think he would have the most crushing, negative, resentful, and just completely wounded attitude towards Katie. But instead, if we go back to the way he actually testifies in the trial, he's just blasé. He has this blasé, oh yeah, we got along, everything was great. I was trying to be nice to her. No. That would not be your core attitude. If you were really such a hapless victim who had no idea that this could happen, and then suddenly she dropped this bomb on you that they've killed your brother-in-law up in Tallahassee. I think just not because he cared so much about Dan Markel, but because how crushing that would be to the Adelson family to have that shadow on them, getting the whole family under suspicion of a capital crime, okay, and then him potentially losing his life and end up, now that he is on the hook for this first degree murder, you know what I mean? So if he was really such a hapless victim, I think he would have this deep, deep, wounded resentment towards Katie McBonowa, and he wouldn't be capable of generating this glib, kind of attitude like, oh yeah, we got along, I was nice to her. Oh no, I didn't know she was an extortionist at that time. Ha ha ha. No, he couldn't generate that tone, because he would be so infused with this terrible, terrible resentment. And so now let's look at his testimony and just see how he doesn't have the right attitude when he talks about Katie to actually match his theory that she put him in such a bad position where he's really just losing his life. So let's take a look at that.
June 24th of 2014, she says, baby, I'm going to need help on the employment info. I have to send to DCF for my kids' insurance. Also, if I have to end up moving later on, I need to show I'm working for you, or else I won't be able to get an apartment. To which you respond, no problem. Remember that?
Yeah, but I wasn't thinking she was asking about payroll. I think she was asking just to say that she worked there, so we'd sign a letter saying that she was employed. But that doesn't say anything about writing checks to her.
And that request was made in between the two trips that the killers made.
That request, well, she asked me if I could do that for her while I was dating her, and I never even did it.
And did she ask if you could do that in between the two trips that the killers made?
I didn't know when they went up, but I found out later that they went up in June.
All right. So that email would have been sent, or I'm sorry, it's a text. That text would have been sent prior to what you're calling is the first layer of the extortion.
That text was sent to me while I was dating her, but I never.
Prior to the first layer of extortion?
The text was sent in June.
Prior to the first layer of extortion?
Before I was extorted, yeah.
What's the purpose of keeping Katie happy? Was she gonna sick the Latin Kings on you if you made her unhappy?
She was protecting me. I didn't know what would happen, and she was keeping my mind like when the extortion never went up, and I thought that she wasn't part of it, and she was protecting me. Usually, extortion goes up. It always gets ratcheted up from what I've heard.
What's the fear of not keeping her happy? Is what I'm trying to understand.
Well, I could get killed, or the people who were extorting me could come rob me. And I didn't get killed. I didn't get robbed. The extortion never went up. I thought she was really protecting me.
And I guess I would take that story more seriously if he had a different tone about it, right? I think his attitude just shows that he just doesn't really believe in his story. Really, when you take everything into account and you see how he really feels about his case now, okay, now that we've heard these jail calls, okay, and we sort of penetrated through his veneer and we see he's actually a much more realistic person than he appears on the surface, right? And he really does, I think, see his case, I think, in a very realistic way. When you look at it in that light and you look at this testimony, okay, I think you can see that he just doesn't put the heart and soul too much into his story, really. Because if he really was extorted that way, just in looking back on Katie and anything associated with Katie, I think he would have a different tone. I think it would be impossible for him to conceal just a deep wounded bitterness. And he just comes across so blasé that all I can say is that, I have to wonder what are his motives really? I think he's trying to save himself, but I also think he doesn't really believe in his case. So I have to think that the only thing he's doing is he's just trying to save the rest of his family. He's trying to save, I guess, his mother, knowing that his mother's on the hook for this too, and maybe just potentially trying to save Wendy. But to say that he really believes in his case, at least in my opinion, I'd have to see a different tone. And just taking everything into account, just looking at everything we now know, looking at these jail calls, I think Charlie is definitely shocked that he was convicted. Okay, but I think it's because he feels there was something wrong with the jury in Tallahassee, that it's impossible to get a fair trial in Tallahassee. And I think I just hear a lot of investment in his technical innocence, but as far as his actual innocence, I just don't think I'm not feeling it. That's just my impression. And I have the right to have my impression, but that's just pretty much my impression. And I think it's just a very sad case. But anyway, really appreciate your patience and thanks for watching.